Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone today to this talk entitled Women in Print, Expanding the LA Canon. Today, our primary focus is to pay homage to the many artists and wonderful artworks that have preceded our activities. We aim to discuss the history of women-led printmaking collectives in Los Angeles, with a particular focus on how the political nature of this production led to it being sidelined by the broader art market, including galleries and museums. Also, we'll be touching upon how discriminatory practices in California led to the neglect of BIPOC artists and their cultural contributions in the greater Southern California art scene. I'd like to introduce our panelists. I have next to me Carol Wells, who's my new, most recent shiro. She is an art historian. She deserves a big applause. She's an art historian and the founder of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics, which began in the 80s. And she, if you don't know what it is, it's an archive of 90,000 political posters housed in Culver City. And they span from the late 1800s to the present, and they are international. It's a mind-blowing collection, and I believe it's open to the public.
By appointment.
By appointment.
But yes.
Okay, great. Carol has been protesting injustice since the 1960s. To her right is Linda Vallejo, another shiro of mine now, who is a fabulous painter and installation artist whose work addresses Chicano culture and indigenous spirituality from a feminist perspective. Linda has also been an educator and a master printmaker who was active with self-help graphics in the 70s and 80s. Later, she was also involved with the Women's Building, and we'll be touching upon that history today a little bit as well. And then to the right of Linda, we have Barbara Carrasco, yet another shiro. This whole stage is populated with them. A fabulous artist and muralist who's LA-based, who has had her work exhibited internationally. And for many years, she created visual imagery for the United Farm Workers of America, developing a very close relationship with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So I'd like to thank each of you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Myself, I'm an artist. I've long had an interest in printmaking, and I am the founder of the Judith Center. So I'm thrilled to be here. One thing that's of particular interest to the Judith Center is the impact that sexism has had in the arts and beyond, and in particular on how this phenomenon has shaped our communities and our perception of who we are and who we can be. In response to this, as we began looking at some of the history of art in Los Angeles, we noticed that in the media of printmaking, there was a sort of anomalous situation that arose around a lot of women who were active with different community organizations and collectives. They were involved in such a way that they were able to work prolifically, having a sort of profound impact on many people around them. Much of this production occurred outside of sort of the confines of what's thought of as the regular art market. And largely that was because a lot of women were not exhibited in galleries or in museums. That wasn't necessarily normal to the time period we're talking about. It sort of begins in the 60s, it goes through the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s. And as we know, sexism in the arts is still a huge issue today, and we'll be talking about that in later programming. I'd like to start by asking Carol if you could paint a picture for us about this time period in Los Angeles, late 60s on through the 90s, how there were many women not only involved with collectives and different organizations, but actually driving them, heading them, setting the stage for their activities.
I actually did not realize that at the time. When I started I was a medievalist studying for my PhD at UCLA. I became obsessed. My life was turned around in 1981 when a poster changed my life in Nicaragua, and I became obsessed with collecting posters in 1981. So I had a lot of catching up to do of that early history. I could tell you parts of that, my narrow part of that, living through that history. Anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. I was at Century City in '67 when I saw police abuse up close and personal, which I never would have believed had I not seen it. But as far as the women printmakers, and I was not looking for that, so I wasn't taking that in. And then in the early '90s, the Getty asked me to do an exhibition. They were in the process of moving up to the Getty Center wasn't done yet, and they had that big office building, or at least part of it, in Santa Monica, and they were doing exhibitions there, and so they asked me if I would do something. They didn't care what, and they put me in they connected me with some bureaucrat. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just kind of somebody who was do whatever they asked him to do. And he didn't quite get it. And so our first meeting, and he says, now, I don't want anything too political. So I said, the name of my organization is Center for the Study of Political Graphics. I think you don't quite get the idea, but it's okay with me. We haven't done any work on it. I'll just leave, and you can get what's up. And he got nervous because he had been assigned to me. So we talked, and I kind of, I was torn between being pissed off and feeling a little sorry for him because he really didn't get it. So I said, all right, let's try to figure out. And I was thinking, and even me, I'm thinking of something that's less political than what we usually did. I admit I was trying to make his life easier. And I came up with the topic, let's do LA posters. Not a clue in my mind how political they were. I was mainly collecting stuff on Central America, from Central America. And so he loved that idea, because both of us shared the misconception that that actually was documented in the first Getty Pacific Standard Time show. Because the first Getty Pacific Standard Time show was to document the importance of art production in LA post-World War II. But the center's posters were in 15% of those exhibitions, which means that at Pacific Standard Time was also documenting the importance of LA as a political activist city, which I was not even aware of. So I pulled together all the posters. I figured I wouldn't have many, and I had hundreds. And so I decided to put them in piles by theme. And there was ecology, there was women's rights, there was police abuse, there was immigration. I mean, all this anti-war, all the stuff you see now was around then. The biggest pile, it wasn't that big, but the biggest pile was police abuse. This was right after Rodney King, but the police abuse posters went back to the 50s, because that's really where our stuff started. The smallest pile was women's rights. We had one poster from LA on pro-choice, on abortion rights. Only one at that time. So that exhibition was like a mind-blowing thing for me, because I realized LA really has had a serious political poster-making history. So I had a chance a couple of years later to do a bigger show at Track 16 Gallery in Bergamot and at Loyola Marymount, the gallery there, the Laban Gallery. And that's when I started researching the collectives. And LA is not really, it does not get credit for a lot of things, and especially New York and San Francisco and Chicago tend to dominate both the art scene and the political scene and the organizing scene. But this exhibition was like, I found about close to, definitely over a dozen political poster making collectives, and women played either a founding role or a major role in most of them.
I'd just like to interject also, Carol created a book around this, Los Angeles at the Center and on the Edge. That's a wonderful documentation of that history and those collectives, if anyone's interested.
But it stops at the 90s. So that was really documenting those first 3 decades. And so that was really, something that I was learning as I was going along, because this history isn't documented. You know, this history isn't recorded anywhere. And there's still, and even I just found yesterday, I was talking to Irene Cervantes, and there was a collective that she was involved with in the mid-'80s around making posters and exhibitions to stop U.S. intervention in Central America. I didn't know about that one. So there's still the history is still to be written, there's still to be researched.
Thank you, Carol. One thing you had mentioned in conversation with me was that early on, a lot of women printmakers were addressing war as a topic, but it didn't really come until much later that women started producing posters about questions of being a woman, about the experience of being a woman, women's rights, so on and so forth, that didn't emerge until some decades later. And just a quick mention, the slides, there are many slides here. Some feature Linda's work, Barbara's work, and some are posters from the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. But we've ordered them, so there are posters that women have made about war going on in a variety of places, and then it shifts to being imagery that's specifically women-focused.
Yeah, just a real quick comment. The poster production and political art in general really was killed by McCarthyism. So there's this huge gap of I mean, the unions were making, that was probably the only group that was, and not many. So there's a huge gap from the 50s where political posters were not made. Lots of them in the 30s and the 40s, but not in the 50s. And it was the Vietnam War and the protests that revived. The civil rights movement did not really use many posters. They had music. Art's been central to every movement for social change. You can't think of the civil rights movement without the music. We shall overcome. We shall not be moved. But posters were not that many.
Carol?
And it was the Vietnam War that revived it, and that's one of the reasons. But then the sexism and the organizing of the Vietnam War protests gave way to the women's movement, you know, gave way to the LGBTQ movement, because it really showed the divisions among the progressive movement. And so I think that was all part of what made them develop and flourish.
Can you mention some of the organizations that came about or that you're aware of? And in the interest of time, maybe the really speedy version, because we've got a lot of ground.
I know, I feel I'm
No, you're doing fabulous. You're doing great.
You know, the Mexicano Art Center was actually predates self-help graphics, and there were women involved in that. I think it was mainly men, but there were definitely women involved in that, poster making, murals, teaching classes. So they started in 1969. And then you have Sister Karen Bacalera, who I believe was I don't know if she was a student. I know she worked with Sister Carita at Immaculate Heart. And, you know, she started self-help graphics in 1972. So actually, it was after Mexicano already had folded. Then you've got the women who started the women's building downtown, who Sheila Laurent of Bretteville and Arlene Raven and Judy Chicago. They started the Feminist Studio Workshop, which was located in the women's building, and then they had a subset, which was the Women's Graphic Center. Because when you think of art and big canvases, sculpture, these are all pretty expensive, where prints are relatively affordable and they're portable. And so they were much more in the economic realm of women who did not have the same economic base as, for the most part, weren't getting the same salary for the same work as men. And so also you could do it in your home. They were small. You know, silk screens, you could make your own silk screen. You know, stencils were really, really cheap. And you could make as many or as few as you wanted at any one time.
Before you go on, that's such a good point, because one of the things I wanted to foreground here is there's a reason why women were turning to printmaking. It is because it was affordable. It was easy to do compared to some of the other mediums.
Yeah, Little Tokyo Art Workshop had Miles Hamada was the master printer, but Chris Yamashita was involved in that, and Masa Hoshino was involved in that. Actually, I think over the course of the time, maybe 30 different artists or more were actually, this says over 60 artists were involved with that. Artists for Survival was a male-led organization, but after the founder, Peter Carr, died, Sherry Galkey basically took it over and made it into a performance theater for an anti-nuke project which she worked on with Ed Pearl, who founded the legendary folk club, the Ash Grove. Shock Battalion was basically a man and a woman artist. I think it was Charlene Hassenkal has, I think, 2 pieces up in the show, and Mark Valen was had founded it and brought Charlene in. The Artist Resource Center was founded by Sheila Pinkel, and they used to meet at the Midnight Special, another bookstore that we no longer have. And Kim Abelies, Melanie Boone, Jim Dolan, Ruth Sampetro, Sue Smith were all involved in the Artist Resource Center. And they would do posters for the movement, for the demonstrations, because they were really important, especially the anti-U.S. intervention Central America one. The one that Elena told me about was the East Side Artists, which a group of women who went to Central America, went to Nicaragua, and they came back, and they formed that organization. Mothers of Medusa was anonymous, modeled themselves after the Guerrilla Girls out of New York, and they're focused on the lack of women's representation in museums and galleries. I love one of their banners, which I don't have. I wish I did. One of their posters said, "Your genitals can make you a success." Or another one, "Living woman artist accidentally given major museum retrospective, curator sacked." Okay. Then in the mid '90s, there was a group called Common Threads Artist Group, also founded by Sheila Pinkel and with Judy Bronfman, Eva Cockcroft, Alessandra Moctezuma, Leda Ramos, Mary Lynn Hughes, and Roxanne Auer. So they were working on the garment workers industry. They were working for the right to unionize. They were working on their working conditions. So they were very, very activist. All of these groups all of these artists were actually activists. They not only made the posters, but they carried them in demonstrations. They distributed them to the organizers of the demonstrations, and they worked with the people whose lives were affected. So, and then the last one I have written here is the Women's Action Coalition, which was an open alliance that sought to address women's issues through direct action, and so they did a lot of posters. They really, especially around domestic violence, I think they came into being right around the O.J. Simpson trial, and they did posters like had his picture and saying 100% guilty of domestic violence. So where they couldn't agree on his guilt in the trial of murder, that was actually, we had proof on a 911 tape that he actually was beating her up. So so these were some of the main groups that we've come up with so far. There may still be more.
Great, thank you so much, Carol. Linda, I'd like to turn it to you. Maybe you can speak for a moment about your experience with self-help graphics. In conversation with you, you mentioned that as you were working as a printmaker there, you were really one of the only women doing that, if not the only woman at that time. And also I'd like to introduce for the audience that Sister Karen Bacalero, who founded that, had worked very closely with Sister Corita Kent as a student and maybe had been inspired by that model. So there was Sister Corita Kent sort of coming out of the Catholic Church, being community-minded, that had to some degree influenced Sister Karen Bacalero, and that was a model of a woman thinking about their community and how to give back. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience there and what that was like.
Sister Corita Kent was a mentor and an inspiration for Sister Karen Boccoletto. She spoke of her often and was inspired by her to be an artist as well. Karen was a printmaker too, and printed in her own atelier, and spoke often of how she had inspired her to start self-help graphics and do this kind of work in community. Sister Karen's convent actually supported Karen Boccoletto in her work for many years. They actually gave of their own funds to make sure that Sister Karen's vision came true in the barrio. Sister Karen was born in Boyle Heights as well. I don't think a lot of people know that about her. And her real name was Carmen inside, right? Self-help graphics was like the rest of the art world. It was basically, what, 20% women, 80% men? There was women coming through, but many people didn't stay. They would come in to do some work, maybe work on a project or something. Some women would come and go. while I was there, Sybil Venegas was there, and Irene Cervantes was there a little later, and Barbara Carrasco was there a little later as well. But when I was there, Sara Pineda was there, but she left shortly after. And for a very long time, I was the only woman on site.
I wanted to point out there was something very unique about self-help graphics, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Growing up in Boyle Heights, you know, it's a neighborhood in Los Angeles that's greatly impacted by redlining. There's a lot of racism going on at that time in a very intense way, and it's a particular, as an organization, it had a particular focus on giving back to the community. Creating a place of resource and hope and recreation for students, for artists, and creating opportunities for many artists who didn't have any visibility at that time, and really incredible artists.
Cultural awareness in the late 70s was happening all over town. Many of the groups that you spoke of, the collectives that you spoke of, were really about discovering themselves within the niche of their own communities, and Self-Help Graphics was the same. It was really about reaching as many people as possible through education, and ergo self-help graphics. And the Barrio Mobile Art Studio was one of the first vehicles that Sister Karen devised to reach out to the community, which was hiring artists to work as teachers in elementary schools, teaching photography, sculpture, painting, and I did silkscreen at that time. I was getting my MFA at Cal State University Long Beach, so I was a MFA in printmaking. And there was a lot of effort to instill the art projects that were brought to the schools with cultural awareness, using Mesoamerica as an entry point, studying the gods, studying the pyramid sites, studying the ancient history of Mexico and the Americas. And so it was really a cultural awareness project, as well as a producing beautiful images by children, being taught by community artists. There was quite a lot of artists. Alfredo de Patuc was there, Richard Duardo was there, John Valadez was there, Leo Limon, Micah Mesqua, and myself, Richard Reyes was there. And we would go out 2 to 3 days a week and work with children through the arts to understand and to develop cultural awareness and cultural joy, if you will. Cultural joy, a sense of belonging, a sense of knowledge of oneself and one's community and one's heritage.
Can you speak a little bit about how your experience there, or maybe the other way around, you later had some involvement with the Women's Building. Can you speak a little bit about what that was like? Because I believe that organization was largely white women, and what that meant for you to sort of go to that environment and what the contrast was there.
Well, when I was, well, even still today, I enjoy many different kinds of communities. I enjoy many different kinds of conversations. I enjoy many different types of art images and art product. And
you moved around a lot in your childhood, right?
I moved a great deal as a child. I went to middle school in Montgomery, Alabama in the 60s, and high school and college in Madrid after being born in Boyle Heights. So I was brought up, if you will, in largely white communities as a Mexican American. And I learned how to enjoy the conversations and learning about many different cultures around the world. So when I came to Los Angeles to get my MFA and was hired by Sister Karen to work at Self-Help Graphics, I started to investigate Los Angeles. You know, here's my town, let's check it out. And I found my way to the Women's Building, and I felt very much at home. It was a nice relief from all the guys at Self-Help Graphics, that's for sure. Right, all the guys at Self-Help Graphics, I found myself surrounded by women, talking about women's issues, talking about women's concerns, talking about the body, talking about sexuality, talking about discrimination against women, all the great fodder for the greatest works of art by women that I can think of. And so I brought Chicana artists from Self-Help Graphics and generally speaking the Chicano community to work on projects at the Women's Building. I was on their board of directors for a while. I showed in their exhibition space on several occasions, and I'm really happy to say that several of the women that I knew then and cared a great deal, including Sherry Galkey and Sue Mayberry and Terry Wolverton and Jerry Allen, are still very deep friends of mine. It was a great time in Los Angeles. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of ground to be broken, and everybody seemed to be young and had the sledgehammers to do it. But as we're going to continue our conversation, we're going to find out that the earth is a lot deeper than we thought it was, and breaking, breaking the ceiling for women in the arts is a much bigger task than any one of us had actually imagined.
I think it's so interesting how you were such an important bridge between these two organizations, and that was rare in that time. And it says it's pretty.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being a bridge. I traveled up and down the state of California and visited other collectives and took posters from Self-Help Graphics up and collected posters and brought them back down. I was in Sacramento with Galeria La Posada, with the Royal Chicano Air Force, and at the Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco and Galeria de la Raza in San Diego. And as a danzante, I also traveled up and down the state presenting with the Flores de Aztlán, and had an opportunity to meet people and collect objects and learn about California culture, learn about the print community, because all of those organizations had prints in common. And to get back to your other comment, I think that when you work in community, quote unquote, when you work to communicate with large groups of people across a very expanse, prints are a very excellent way to do this, because not everyone is connected in the same way. But prints can travel easily and can share ideas, invitations, announcements to a very large group of people. And that's one thing that many of the community groups had in common, was they wanted to, Self-Help Graphics, the Women's Building, and all the groups that you were mentioning, and the ones that I visited, wanted to connect with thousands of people to change the face of California, to change the face of cultural awareness, and of course to change the opportunities for women and women artists and women's voice.
That's a good lead-in to Barbara. Barbara, across town, you were very active with your own artistic production, which happened with another organization, a very different kind of organization, United Farm Workers of America. And maybe you could speak for a moment about how you came to work with that group and how you first encountered Cesar Chavez.
Well, is this on?
Yes.
The year was 1976. I wasn't quite yet a student at UCLA. I had a boyfriend who was there, so I was on the campus early. And Cesar Chavez gave a speech in one of the auditoriums, and I had no idea that I was going to work with him for 15 years, creating large mural banners for the conventions, for demonstrations. And it was a lot of physical labor. It was a lot of work, actually. And at the same time that I was working with him, I was also in the art department at UCLA, and I created my first print there. It was a lithograph print, and it was you showed one of the slides. It's a pregnant woman trapped in a ball of yarn, and it was based on the way my brother treats his wife. And it's just so funny because I heard my brother tell his pregnant wife that she couldn't go to college because she had to stay home and take care of the kid. And then I was really upset because our mother was a really strong feminist, so she was a professional bowler. So I said, do we have the same mother? Anyway, but I did that drawing in one night, and that drawing today is still as popular as ever. It's amazing. I presented it 2 years ago in Munich, Germany. And I mean, it's still very much alive, that one print, and so see, this is a 30 by 30 foot banner I did for that. That's how large the banners were. And Cesar gave me like very short notice on. He goes, Barbara, can you do a banner for a convention? And I said, well, how much time do I have? And he would say like 7 days to do a 30 by 30. It was ridiculous, but I did it because it was him. And because it was for the actual workers. These were shown in Salinas and Delano, and with thousands of farm workers in the audience. And so I felt like all the work that I created for the farm workers was part of the movement. I was an integral part of their whole picture of what they were trying to achieve with farm workers, which was to empower them with legislation that would secure their future for, I think the first, they had like different things that they were fighting for, which was the Agricultural Labor Relations Board was a very important organization, but did not serve farm workers as well until the union got involved. And in the process, I met Dolores Huerta, she was a co-founder and vice president at the time, and I felt a real kinship with her because she was very much a fighter. I would go in meetings with her, and she would talk about all the problems with the farm workers. And the night before, she would tell me what was going to happen in the meeting, and Caesar would take credit for it. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. He would say something about what they're going to do, and it was the night before she told me that was her idea. So I grew to really respect her, and actually he respected her a lot too. That he had her go to Sacramento, and lobby on behalf of farm worker rights. So he respected her as someone who can actually legislate stuff. I mean, fight with the legislators about rights for farm workers. And, that was pretty difficult to do because she was getting labeled a dragon lady and all these horrible things that were attributed to her. But now I think about it, it's not very bad to be called those things at all, troublemaker. And so this lady is now 93 years old. I'm on her board of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and she's doing stuff that Caesar wanted to do and didn't have the opportunity to do, which is empower young communities and farm worker families in Lamont, different areas of the state of California that are really impoverished. I mean, I'm talking about really impoverished farm worker children. So I just have a tremendous amount of respect for her.
I wanted to revisit a couple things we had talked about prior to this talk, which is you had mentioned, how hugely important she was to pointing out issues that women workers in particular face that are different than men workers.
Yeah.
But another thing I wanted to point to is how you yourself were experiencing sexism as an artist, and how working with this group was an opportunity in a way. They weren't financially compensating you, but they were offering you materials. They were buying the materials. And so how by forming an alliance with an organization, it gave you an opportunity to be creatively expressive, and you may not have had that otherwise. I wonder if you might speak to that for a second.
Well, it was it was really difficult because the sexism came in sort of indirect kind of comments about we that big huge banner you saw was 30 by 30 feet, done in a really short time. So I had to improvise on ways to make that possible. I broke it into 10 by 30 foot strips, and then had it was really difficult. But a lot of the comments were like, "Are you sure you can do something that large?" And I thought, like, wow, if a guy could do it, I could do it. The artist who preceded me was the late Carlos Amaraz, who did humongous banners. His banners were a lot larger than mine, but he also had a lot of people helping him. I think Caesar really liked him a lot. He was a really great person. I really miss him. He was very supportive of female artists, very supportive, and he encouraged me to work with Caesar. And but the banners that he did were gigantic. They were, and so the union, because it's a union, not an arts organization, they would sometimes fold the banners, and they got cracked and all that. And I remember telling them, please roll them, And I know artists like Leon Golub, did large scale banners, and he would roll them. I saw him rolling at I was in a show with him at this gallery once, and I saw him get a carpet tube and roll his banner over the carpet tube to keep it, from getting wrinkled or kinked. And but my words fell on deaf ears. They didn't listen to me at all. I mean, they still, folded the banners and put them in a horrible storage space, and they got ruined, with the elements and all that. And so when I started working with the union, I decided not to use the traditional paints. I changed it to vinyl, working with toxic inks on vinyl. I got really sick from doing that. But you could bend the vinyl, and the paint wouldn't crack. It would bend with it. And so Caesar he was like amazed that I came up with that. And I said, well, I talked to a lot. I had good friends with the RCAF, the Royal Chicano Air Force, and I would call them up for advice, and say, hey, you guys, I'm doing this big banner. How do I do stuff that doesn't crack, And they would tell me. And I think when I talk to young people now, I tell them don't be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of our young people are intimidated by doing something huge and something new, and so it's amazing to me. But I always I do I have taught at a lot of different places. You see, Riverside is when I had taught a mural class there for the first time, and all my students seemed like they were afraid to speak up. And I said, oh my God, I'm here to answer any question you need to ask. And so it was kind of surprising for me, because I was always asking questions. I remember
really fast. I want
Okay, go
to keep us moving because we're running out of time, Barbara. I
Okay.
love that story, but I'm going to ask you another question. So I've
Okay.
got one more for you. So in our conversations a bit here, we had also talked about some women of other cultural identities who are active on the scene. Nani Alabisi, who was involved with self-help graphics. Elizabeth Catlett's prints were sometimes being made in Los Angeles. We know Betty Saar was occasionally making prints. And Barbara, you mentioned you had been involved with the Women's Caucus of Art, and I wonder if you might speak a little bit to your experience there and sort of your relationship with Faith Ringgold and some other women who were influencing what was going on.
Well, I got involved with them because a lot of my feminist friends suggested I do so, and I thought it was a good opportunity to meet other artists, not from my immediate community. There were a few Chicanas in the organization at the time. Margaret Gallegos, who's a practicing artist now, and Anita Miranda, who became a collector of Chicano art. And so, but when Faith Ringgold came into the picture, she started a subgroup in there called Women of Color, but it was still part of the Southern California Women's Caucus for Art. And I really like what she was saying, that it was necessary for women of color to get more involved, but that some of the things that the issues they were speaking about didn't really relate to us, women of color. Of course, we were all being left out of major shows. That was across the board. That's one thing we all had in common. But especially Latinas, especially Chicano artists. All the guys were, definitely in there, but when it came to women, we were just not being asked to be in these exhibits. And so anyway, but I really respect Faith Ringgold for doing that. And I think they recently honored Linda, the Southern California Women's Caucus for Art, which, is well-deserved, Linda. And so, I think it's a really good organization that brought together so many women from different backgrounds, different, that's what I loved about it. And so some of those women I'm still friends with now.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. So I want to shift the conversation towards the question of how this history has been preserved and presented. Recently, I was chatting with a very prominent curator from one of the major Los Angeles art museums, and we were talking about this history, and she said, oh, Catherine, a lot of this has been shown. There have been a lot of exhibitions, so on and so forth. And after talking with her, I was thinking, it's so funny, like there have been exhibitions here and there. I know what she mentioned, and I've seen many of those. But for me, for some reason, this history and many of these artists, cultural producers, are not burned in my brain in the way that so many white male artists are from the same time period. And I thought we might open up the conversation to talking about how this history has been preserved through what means, and museums being sort of the primary vehicle for doing that, how they've succeeded and how they've failed. And Carol, maybe we'll start with you. I know you have some strong thoughts about it, and I'd love to hear from you on that.
Well, when I started collecting and exhibiting posters, which was in the 80s, museums, unless they were 100 years old, and by Toulouse-Lautrec, they didn't get shown. And we, if it had political content, it was considered agitprop, which was not art. If it was, on hot, stuff made for a demonstration, it was considered ephemera. It wasn't art. So there was all these ways of diminishing and dismissing the contribution of these poster artists who were really quite extraordinary. And the work they were doing is extraordinary. And not only was a lot of it gorgeous, not all of it, but it was trying to make the world a better place, which you can't say about a lot of art that you see in the museums. And once in a while, we would get in a museum, and then we would have a new idea, and we would come a couple of years later and say, we've got this great idea for another exhibition. Oh, we did a poster exhibition. We did yours a couple of years ago. We've done easel painting. That's enough. We don't have to do it for another 10 years. I've never heard that. But political posters were definitely, okay, check it off. We don't have to do it again for another decade. Mm-hmm. But then posters started getting in vogue. We had an exhibit once that was like really last minute add-on to an exhibition at the Skirball that they spent 3 years planning. They got it from someplace else, they paid a fortune. And then some of the curators saw our exhibition that we did at on Decade of Dissent, LA, 1965 to 75. It was at the opening of the new West Hollywood Library. They said, oh, this would be about democracy. It's perfect for this founding fathers exhibition that we're having. Well, all the press went to the poster exhibition. They might have said, also showing is, 2 sentences. So their major curators are really sidelined, and this junior curator who did our show was getting all the attention. And so all of a sudden people started knowing, people like seeing posters. They understand posters. They get crowds. They're dealing with issues now. But then when they show them, it's like, be careful what you wish for. They don't provide context. They don't explain the historical background that motivated the piece. They don't give any information. They're treating them as aesthetic objects. So after spending decades ignoring the aesthetics, now that's what they focus on. Because it's also a way of neutralizing the posters. If you're not talking about the political content and you're talking about the type font or the aesthetics, then it's neutralizing them. And you're still seeing that in museums today. Because now posters are really hot. LACMA has a political poster collection they're building. San Francisco MoMA has a political poster exhibition. The Whitney has been doing them at least since the 80s, and they're among the worst as far as not creating context. So the fight is still to fight to get why those posters were made, why people made them, who the audiences were, and what they accomplished.
I think that's a nice point. I was recently at the Laguna Art Museum and visited the retrospective of 50 years of self-help graphics prints. And that was the case, there was the name of the artist and the title, but no other information about the individual works. And many of those works were addressing so many rich topics and histories and specific issues. And it really was a loss in a way. It was a beautiful exhibition, but I went away not really understanding a lot of that history, and I saw it as a lost opportunity. I wonder if, in talking about this with you, Linda, you might speak a bit to the idea of how this history is associated with community, and how women might have been working in community and have one idea about that, and how that stands in contrast to the way museums have often exhibited sort of the work of an artistic genius. The
concept of a singular male genius, visionary artist is in direct opposition to women in community. They are diametrically opposed concepts. And there's, never the twain shall meet. I ask the question, is there really a space for a visionary, genius woman artist, painter, in either side's vernacular understanding of history or of art itself?
Well, and having an indigenous background, I think this question would be of a lot of importance to you, because the way in which the concept of individual identity is constructed is quite different.
Yes. The matriarchy is still alive in indigenous America. From what I can see in the structure of American culture, including the museums, et cetera, the DNA and the understanding of this has been lost for a very long time. Those of us that might remember our great-grandmothers may have some inkling of what it meant to have a matriarchal family structure, cultural structure, but that's basically nothing that anyone even remembers what it looks like or what it tastes like or what it feels like or how it functions. In indigenous community, which is, I think, much more akin to the idea of what we're talking about, to try to superimpose that understanding of women's voice, women's power, women's vision, women's ability into a Western museum setting. As I say, it's antithetical. You'll rack your brains trying to figure out how that functions, and it just doesn't. It's very difficult. That's why I live basically two worlds, where I am in the indigenous world as a woman, where women have voice, women have creativity, women have decision-making power and ability, and they're asked for their opinions and understandings of things that have to deal with life and death, have to deal with children, and have to deal with communities as a whole. Where in the museum world is a woman going to find that kind of respect and request for involvement?
I think you're talking about how the very idea of self gets understood as being relational versus being an island.
Yes, but that is exactly the point of the singular male visionary genius, and that is not about community. That's about an individual. That's about an individual's ability to interpret the world, to interpret a stance, to interpret a historical understanding of the world into an object. And I stand that women can do the same. And in the indigenous reality, it would not be questioned. Yes, women can do the same. And women would be expected, as Barbara was expected in her mural work with the UFW. But this is a formula, if you will, that's been held onto with very tight grip for a very long time. And I just wonder, I don't know when it's ever going to let loose.
I think one of the things we're talking about here also is how value gets created around the object. When you have a painting or a sculpture that sells for millions of dollars and it's made by one person, it's given it's assigned a certain value within the museum sphere. Whereas a poster that is practically disposable because there's another one next to it, right? But the may have a different kind of value. But what's interesting about posters is their very efficacy depends on many of them being produced so that they can be spread and it can be interactive and it can be shared. So there seems to be a misunderstanding in the way that monetary value is prioritized versus how these objects actually function in the culture at large.
If I may speak to that just briefly, I think we hit on it just a moment ago in the idea of the history of the object being lost. The history of the community that is inspired by the object, the history of the narrative that's inspired by the object. I think that whether it's a poster or whether it's a painting by a woman, a poster by a woman, a collective by a woman, once that history is never not, if you never speak of the history of how those relationships come together, or the value of the relationships that it took to make that poster, the political movement that included the posters, or the history of the relationships between artists that made the collective that created these objects, then the value is easily lost. The quantitative value, as you're saying, is easily lost. I'm very fortunate to have found individuals who really do care about the relationships between artists and the history of movements as they collide and integrate and influence each other. But I think that if you understand the history of a poster and the movement that surrounded that poster, then obviously the value would increase.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Linda. I'd like to turn to our final point, which is, with the rise of the internet, which is also an easy place for people to disseminate messages, imagery, aesthetics. What is the ongoing relevance of this kind of printmaking or political graphic activity going forward that you guys see? Do you think there's still a place for these physical objects that can be distributed in this way? Maybe you can speak to that.
Yes.
In a short answer.
In a short answer.
Absolutely.
I think they're actually even more important now than they've ever been.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because you can't walk in a demonstration with your computer monitor, and your phone's too damn small. Okay, so you can't put it on, hang it on your wall for people to see. You can't stick it in your window for people to see what your political position is on the war. And so the need for works on paper with a political point of view about this world is going to hell quicker than I've ever seen it. I'm terrified. I have a 16-month-old grandson, and I'm saying, what kind of world is he going to inherit? It's already a mess. Climate change, on all life and death issues, climate change, pro-choice, and women's reproductive health, prison industrial complex. I mean, and I could go on healthcare, and there's not one issue that's not life and death. But the people are reacting. People are organizing. People are putting themselves on the line. People are burning themselves to death.
Yes. Yes.
And posters are an incredible way of letting those people who are watching it on TV or driving their cars by know why you are taking time out from your overbusy life to protest.
From your mediated life, where in some ways we become disconnected from one another.
Now the internet is actually, we have so many posters that are old, not only because some people were collecting them, but because the makers of them didn't get to distribute all of them. So distribution has always been a problem. The internet makes it easy because you don't have to print them all. You could have free downloads. And there's free downloads of, when the immigration was Alto, Arizona, when Arizona was really coming down hard on immigrants, which they still are, you could free download, you could pick the poster you want and download it. And you could download it small or download it big. But so the artist would make the poster, put it online, or a whole organization of artists. You could have your pick of 100 posters, and you download the ones you want. There's an artist called, his pen name is Mr. Fish, and he did when the Arab Spring was happening in Cairo, and there was literally shut the country down practically, and he did this great graphic where he merged the famous King Tut with the striped gold and black crown with the famous photograph by Che Guevara by Corda. And so it was Che's face, but the Egyptian king's, Pharaoh's image. And they published it in LA. This is a part of I think it was truthdig.org. And my husband calls up, you've got to see this great image. So I said, we're going to use that. So I called up them. They gave me permission as long as I credited them. We sent it out to another 9,000 people. The next day, 24 hours later, I'm not saying this because also it was like a combination of what they did. The next day, somebody took a photograph of that image being carried on the streets of Cairo.
Oh, wow.
I got like chills
it's
doesn't even
amazing.
describe it.
Yeah.
But that's what these images can do. Artists can put them online and people can download them if they hire enough resolution. And so I think that the role of the political poster now is way more accessible and important than ever before.
I have a question for Barbara about that, because we were talking a little bit earlier about how, because images can be disseminated so easily now, that you can see them in a second online, as the structure that exists, there's still oppression within it. What happens when your graphic gets appropriated by someone else, and now they're off to the races, but you're not getting credit? Maybe you can speak for a second. You have a funny story about that, Barbara.
Actually, Carol's connected to this. Carol invited me to be on a panel with a few other famous poster artists, and one of them was Shepard Fairey, who I was sitting next to him, and he said to me, "I love the way you did the Dolores print." And then about 5 minutes later, he said he loved the text in the composition of Dolores's face, and he kept talking about it like 5 different times. And I thought, I mean, usually people say I like your poster and that's it, but he just went on, and then I see the Hope portrait. The
Barack Obama portrait.
Yeah, and it was he was definitely inspired by my Dolores print. But this is the weird thing, is the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. purchased the Dolores print for their permanent collection. And so the Latina curator, Taina Caracol, really nice person, her boss, an Anglo woman, asked me if I was inspired by Shepard Fairey.
Oh, wow.
Oh, well, there you go.
Baloney. Excuse me. But I just couldn't believe it. I go, look at the dates. I did mine in 1999, and he did his after. And I was actually part of the Women's Atelier. It was a special, Sister Karen always wanted to do this, have a special all women's atelier. And so I curated one of the ateliers. I think it was 10 women artists. And so mine was called Women as Nurturers. So that's why I did the Dolores print. And so, I mean, to have that someone get credit for my work, oh my God. Anyway.
We're going to wrap up now. Linda, did you have a thought you wanted to add to this?
Oh, yeah, I've always got a thought.
Close out?
Connected to my mouth, too. It's a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. I believe personally myself that as we move into AI and digital imagery, that the hand that touches the paper, the hand that touches the squeegee, that touches the print machine, the press, is going to become more and more and more important. As we move off on this gallivant into push a button, use your mouse, this distancing thing with the object itself, that the hand itself, the touch of the artist's hand to the object, to the media, is going to become more and more and more valuable and more important, because we're going to be flooded. And we already are being flooded by AI imagery. And so that's one side of the coin that I see. The other side, of course, is dissemination of ideas is coming very quickly. Of course, appropriation of images is right around the corner from that. It's just a little left hand or right hand turn around the corner from that. So we're going to be facing a lot of what is mine, what is not mine, what is yours, what is not yours. And I think what's missing in the digital, the edge, is the community that we've been talking about, the relationships between the community. When you don't come together to make the poster, when you don't come together to create the poster, when you don't come together to design an idea, to discuss a concept around a need in the community, then we lose all of those things. And we're already hearing that social media, people are very lonely. The United States is suffering from mental health crisis built around the loneliness of being in touch with this or with this, but not in touch with this. So I think as in everything in life, there's double-edged swords in everything. And I think it's important for us to look at both sides and to make very careful choices.
Well, and how being together in this process of creating these objects, experiencing them, making sense of them, it's an opportunity for people with very different backgrounds and different viewpoints to have an exchange.
And also, if women's way is the way of the community, If women's natural way of being is within community, then we might be facing a crisis where women will not be coming together as often, and we might lose that and the histories that go along with it.
That's a
you
very
know,
good point.
I just wanted
Thank
to say
you.
real fast that I think there's an increase in female curators, which is making a difference, because it was I really have to hand it to those female curators, and there's a lot of them, and they're younger. And I think it's great because they're seeing things very differently from what we've you know, they're just bring a new perspective, and I really appreciate that.
And I want to give a shout out to non-binary perspectives as well,
Yes,
which we
please.
haven't really acknowledged here. So with that, I'd like to make a closing statement and then open it up to any questions. In 2024, I just want to announce where we're going from here. The Judah Center will present further exhibitions and programming across the U.S. As part of its first major initiative, the Judah Center Poster Project. Collaborators include the Hammer Museum, the MSU Broad Art Museum, and the Poster House in New York, among others. And as I mentioned, we'll be working with 50 plus US-based artists over the next few years to be creating exhibitions and more programming. So thank you so much for coming today. And thank you, ladies, for your contribution to this. It's wonderful to learn about this history and to hear about your rich perspectives. So
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you.